I think it's gonna be a long night for him.
I'm gonna put
This is the darkest press conference I've ever been a part of.
Win or lose, will you shake Conor's hand after the fight?
No way. For me, it's personal. A little rat, a little weasel. I've met many of them through my years.
It's going to be fun. UFC fight. It's going to be. Alhamdulillah. Tomorrow night, I'm gonna smash your boy, man.
All right, so you've sent us a bunch of articles on this Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Conor McGregor fight at UFC 229. And at first glance, I thought, okay, this is just another night at the UFC.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't have sent this in if there wasn't something more to it. So let's dive in.
Absolutely.
And find out what made this fight a global phenomenon, like way bigger than just two guys in a cage.
Yeah, what's fascinating here, I think, is the lead up. You had two figures at the absolute top of the sport, but coming from totally different backgrounds, different styles, different personalities.
Right.
It was a recipe for fireworks.
Totally. And it's interesting because their paths to this point were so different.
Yeah.
You have Khabib, this undefeated Dagestani wrestler, known for his quiet intensity and some of the most dominant grappling the UFC has ever seen.
Right, and he's coming in with this aura of invincibility, like no one had really figured out how to crack his game plan yet.
Right. Then you have Conor McGregor, already a champion in two weight classes, a master striker, but also this incredibly charismatic and, let's be honest, sometimes controversial showman.
Oh, yeah.
He knew how to sell a fight like nobody else.
Exactly. And I think it's this clash of styles, both in and out of the octagon, that really sets the stage for this massive rivalry.
Now, the seeds for this actually go back a couple of years before the fight itself, right?
Yeah.
Didn't something happen back at UFC 205 in 2016?
Yeah, there was an incident where Khabib, after Conor won his second title, called him a chicken.
Right.
And, you might think, okay, trash talk, whatever, but in Khabib's culture, with his background in Dagestan, that's a deep insult, a challenge to someone's honor.
Right. So there was already some bad blood brewing even back then. But things really exploded. And I mean, literally exploded in April of 2018 with the infamous bus attack.
Right. This was more than just trash talk.
Right.
Conor, apparently fueled by an altercation between Khabib and his teammate Artem Lobov, storms the Barclays Center with a group of people and attacks a bus carrying Khabib and other fighters.
Okay, wait, hold on. He attacked a bus? Like a full-on city transit people going to work bus.
A full-on dolly through a bus window.
Right.
Injuries, arrests. It was absolute chaos. And for a lot of people, this is when it went from a sporting rivalry to something much more personal and intense.
Yeah, I can see why. I mean, you've got to imagine that changes the whole dynamic.
Yes.
This isn't just about winning a belt anymore. It's about respect, pride, maybe even revenge.
Exactly. And the UFC, they saw this happening.
Oh,
and they knew they had something huge on their hands.
Oh, I bet they did. This wasn't just a fight anymore. It was a story, a spectacle.
Yeah, they launched one of their most aggressive marketing campaigns ever, playing up the bad blood, the personal animosity, the clash of cultures. It was genius from a business perspective, even if it felt like they were playing with fire a little bit.
Right, because how do you control something like that once it gets going? But okay, so the stage is set, tensions are high, but what actually happened in the fight itself? Did it live up to the hype?
Oh, yeah. Oh, it definitely lived up to the hype. In fact, for a lot of people, the fight itself was almost secondary to all the drama surrounding it.
Okay, so walk me through it. I know the basics. Khabib won by submission, but what were the key moments, the turning points?
Well, right from the start, you could tell this was more than just a technical matchup. Like, the energy in the arena was electric. You could feel the tension, the animosity, even through the TV screen.
Oh, I bet. I remember watching it live, and even I was feeling anxious. I'm just sitting on my couch.
Yeah. And the fight itself was a roller coaster. A lot of people thought Khabib would just take Conor down immediately and dominate him on the ground.
Right.
Which is usually his game plan, right?
Right.
Relentless pressure, top control, wear his opponents down.
Right, like a boa constrictor.
Exactly.
Slow, methodical, and in the end, inescapable.
Exactly. But Conor actually surprised everyone in that first round. He defended Khabib's takedowns, landed some good shots, even seemed to frustrate Khabib a bit.
So he wasn't just going to roll over. He was there to fight.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And then in the second round, we saw a moment that really shifted the momentum. Khabib dropped Conor with a huge right hand.
Whoa.
I think that surprised a lot of people because Khabib's not really known for his striking.
No, he's not. I mean, he's got power, but most people thought Conor would have the advantage on the feet.
Right, but that one punch, it showed that Khabib wasn't just a one-dimensional fighter. He was dangerous everywhere, and after that knockdown, you could see Conor was a bit shaken.
Yeah, like he realized he wasn't just dealing with a wrestler, he was dealing with a complete fighter.
And from there, Khabib really took over, got the takedown, started to implement his ground game, that relentless pressure we were talking about. Conor had his moments, even won the third round, which was actually the first time anyone had ever won a round against Khabib in the UFC.
Wow. Really? So even in defeat, Conor was making history.
It's true. But even with that, you could feel Khabib was in control. And then in the fourth round, he secures the win with a neck crank submission.
Now, for those of us who aren't super familiar with all the technical terms, what exactly is a neck crank?
It's basically a submission hold that puts pressure on the muscles and joints of the neck, forcing your opponent to tap out. It can be incredibly painful and dangerous if not applied correctly.
Okay, so not a fun way to go out. But wait, didn't you say the fight itself was almost secondary to the drama? I have a feeling I know what you're talking about.
Oh, yeah. We haven't even gotten to the craziest part yet, because as soon as Khabib wins, instead of celebrating, he climbs out of the cage and goes after Dylan Donis, one of Conor's teammates, who was apparently yelling at him from outside the octagon.
Whoa, hold on. He jumped out of the cage, like into the crowd.
It was absolute pandemonium.
That's insane.
Fights break out everywhere, inside the cage, outside the cage. It was like something out of a movie, security scrambling, trying to get things under control. But it took a long time to settle everything down.
You know, I remember seeing images of that aftermath, and it was wild, just this chaotic scene with people brawling, officials trying to restore order. It felt like something much bigger than just a sporting event had happened.
Yeah, and it had a huge impact on the UFC, both in terms of their image and how they handled fighter conduct going forward.
So much for a clean finish, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about how the UFC was playing with fire a bit with their marketing, but this feels like it went way beyond anything they could have anticipated.
Yeah, I think that's what makes this whole event so fascinating. You know, on the one hand, you have this incredible athletic achievement, Khabib cementing his legacy as one of the greatest fighters of all time. But on the other hand, you have this explosion of violence and chaos that really tarnished the sport's image.
Yeah, I remember at the time people were talking about it everywhere, not just in like the MMA world.
Right.
It was on the news, it was in social media. It felt like this huge cultural flashpoint.
Absolutely. And I think it speaks to how much MMA had grown in popularity and influence. Like, this wasn't just some niche sport anymore. It was a global phenomenon. And when something like this happens on such a big stage, it forces everyone to pay attention.
And what about the fallout? You mentioned the impact on the UFC, but what were the long-term consequences for the fighters, for the sport itself?
Well, both Khabib and Conor faced fines and suspensions from the Nevada State Athletic Commission. And there were a lot of conversations about how the UFC needed to take a more proactive approach to prevent this kind of thing from happening again.
So did they actually change anything, or was it just talk?
They did implement stricter rules for fighter conduct and increased security measures at events. But I think the bigger question is whether they can really control the narrative they're creating, because the more they promote these heated rivalries, the more likely it is that things will spill over outside the octagon.
It's like they're walking this tightrope, right?
Yeah.
On the one hand, they want to create these must-see events that generate a ton of hype and revenue. But on the other hand, they have a responsibility to ensure the safety of their fighters and maintain some level of sportsmanship.
Exactly. And I think that's a tension that's going to continue to play out in combat sports, because at the end of the day, it's a business, but it's also a sport with real human beings at the center of it.
And sometimes those two things clash in a pretty dramatic way.
Mm-hmm.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the takeaway for you? What's the one thing you hope our listener really walks away understanding?
I think for me, it's the idea that even something as seemingly straightforward as a fight can be so much more than just a physical contest. It's a reflection of our cultures, our values, our capacity for both incredible skill and destructive behavior.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it makes you wonder what would have happened if the UFC hadn't leaned so heavily into the rivalry, into the trash talk. Could they have had the same level of success without the chaos? It's a question with no easy answers, and it really speaks to this complex relationship between sport and entertainment.
Thanks for diving into this with me. It's been a fascinating look at a truly unforgettable event in UFC history.